Today, it's a solo episode on Zestology featuring biohacks, health hacks, my adventures in the world of more energy, and specifically today, mouth taping, sourcing elk in London, Babbo Botanicals, more on spermidine, yes, more, unusual applications for apple cider vinegar, and lots more. Hi, I'm Tony. I'm an author, presenter at Sky Sports, and years ago I went to the jungle and got ill. Very ill. So this is my podcast adventure to find more energy. It's packed with biohacking, science, health tech, supplements, and some of the most well-known experts on the planet.
This is something I spent 4 months of my life doing with electrodes glued to my head so that you can do a lifetime worth of meditation.
Decide what you don't give a fuck about, which is something you don't care about.
Some of it gets quite out there.
I had some stem cells sent up to my house that I had stored, and then I injected myself with mannitol.
And we even hack hangovers.
Alcohol is poisonous. So is water and oxygen in the wrong dosage.
So that's my podcast, Zestology. Live life with energy, vitality, and motivation. Let's get straight on then with today's Zestology podcast. This is the podcast all about energy. And I'm going to start today with something that's been on my radar for quite a long time. It is mouth taping. I first heard about this a couple of years ago and I thought it was utterly mad. The concept of taping up your mouth at night, surely you're just going to choke. And more experts that I spoke to recommended it, culminating in James Nestor, who's written this book that I'm rereading at the moment. It is fantastic, and I know I've mentioned it fairly recently. It's so good. It's all about the power of the breath. And you sort of think, oh, come on, mate, breathing. I mean, I can do that already. And actually, as it turns out, there's so much information in how we breathe and when we get it wrong in this book that I've sort of learnt from. And it turns out a lot of us breathe through our mouths at night. And when you do that, it leads to sleep disorders. And it leads to snoring, guilty, and fatigue and poor concentration, weirdly abnormal facial growth as well, and crooked teeth, and moodiness, and dehydration as well. So all those things happen when you breathe through your mouth, and most of us do it. And I've always prided myself as not being a great snorer, but I know that I must sleep quite a bit with my mouth open because I've started to tape my mouth, and it's very different. Now, the experience is quite strange. I bought some, it's like £3 surgical tape off Amazon, and you put it on first night, and I woke up in a right panic in the middle of the night and ripped it off and didn't feel much benefit. And then I gave it a month or two, and then I came back to it. And again, just sort of, it's such an unusual sensation not being able to open your mouth. I think I just panicked a little bit. But on the second night, it stayed on most of the night. And ever since, I've not looked back. And I've only been doing it a month or two, but I honestly feel like I will carry on doing it. Because, there's a lot of fuss around the types of food that you might eat, the supplements you take, getting enough sleep. But actually, this is a real simple win. And I just feel like I'm sleeping deeper when I do it. Simple as that. I just feel like I'm sleeping deeper. Now, James Nestor in the book takes it to a whole new level. And he teams up with this medical expert, and between them they go to a top university in the States, and for 10 days they have their noses completely blocked up. Their noses, not their mouths, their noses. And so they sort of stuff a load of cotton wool up there and tape it all up, and it's grim what happens to them over these 10 days. I think it's 10 days, either 10 days or 2 weeks. Their heart rate goes up, their blood pressure go up, they feel great, they feel really unhealthy, their respiratory rate goes up massively. All their markers are negatively affected by the fact they're not breathing through their nose. And then the second part of the experiment, they breathe solely through their nose for 10 days. And all sorts of interesting things happen. I mean, they go for runs with their mouths taped up, and they find that they've got more capacity, which, by the way, isn't necessarily encouraged straight up. I think a rare side effect of that is that you can just faint. And all sorts of markers then go up. And, this is like the first time this sort of study has been done. And I have found that mouth breathing, or mouth taping rather, and nose breathing at night is helping me to sleep a little bit deeper. It's not a magic pill, but nothing ever is. Later in this podcast, we will return to this topic and I will revisit my interview with James Nestor, because he is bloody good. I wanted to reconnect with a couple of the topics from last week that I spoke to Andy from afa0eae7bf1149628da045ecf6a5a0bb on. And I don't know if you've heard that podcast yet, but if not, I think you'll love it. Honestly, he is so good. And it was all about skincare and skin regimes, which might sound like you might be, I mean, it's not necessarily my number one area of interest, but I absolutely loved it. And I listened back to it again last week and I was like, wow, yeah, I'm learning again. And a couple of the things that we spoke about was Andy's go-to meal, which is elk. And I've been trying to source elk in London. And I said on last week's podcast, I'm going to find elk. So here is my elk update. I have found a place to get elk in London, but I'm a little bit worried about it now. And that is because I've done a lot of research on elk. And apparently elk, unfortunately, suffer from chronic wasting disease, which is a contagious and fatal neurodegenerative disease, and it affects deer, moose, reindeer and elk. Now, I know a lot of people eat elk, including Andy Narlow from afa0eae7bf1149628da045ecf6a5a0bb. I know Joe Rogan loves a bit of elk and his freezer's stuffed full of it. But when I went and looked back over Dr. Dale Bredeson's recommendations for eating meat, he said, don't eat elk because of the neuro disease that they suffer from. You don't know if it lives on in the meat. I'm a bit disappointed about that. I have found an option, which is bison meat, which is apparently low in saturated fat, healthier than beef, and great. And I'm going to order some bison meat in London instead. But if you have tried elk in London, or you've got a different thought to Dr. Dale Bredeson, will you let me know? You know, you can go to TonyWrighton.com, all the usual ways. Let me know what you think about elk in London, because I think this is a theme that could run and run on Zestology. The other things that we talked about, Babo Botanicals. So the sun cream, obviously, that was a little bit of a theme last week. We were looking at, you know, stuff you put on your face. And I have now received that Babo Botanical sun cream. It's great. Factor 50, not too white and chalky when you put it on your skin. Good for kids as well. I can rub it into my son and he looks slightly like he's seen a ghost, but there's always going to be a slight sheen unless you get a tinted one. And I think in terms of the ones that aren't tinted, I think it's probably the best. Now, the other thing that we spoke about was face masks. And I've done two things since last week. Firstly, because Andy makes an amazing face mask. And I'm a new man. I can put on a face mask every once in a while. And Andy said that he put apple cider vinegar in his face mask. So since last week, I brewed up a clay mask in the evening, put a tiny little bit of water in, a little bit of apple cider vinegar, and then here's the other thing I did, which you're going to love. You know, we've been talking about this miracle aging supplement recently, a miracle longevity supplement called spermidine. It's been quite a theme on Zestology. If you haven't heard my interview with Zora the Explorer from a couple of weeks ago, you might want to check it out. I emptied out a capsule of spermidine and put it in the face mask. And do you know what she said? She has a skincare expert on her podcast, and she said she likes doing that. And then I think, a few other people have recommended it. It turns out you're only supposed to put 1/10 of a capsule of spermidine in the face mask. And I put a whole capsule in. But there you go. And I have to say it worked. It brought all the blood to the surface of the skin on my face. And the next day, I felt good. I felt like it had shaved a few months off. Maybe not a few years, but a few months. So unusual applications for apple cider vinegar and spermidine. It's not something you're going to read in many textbooks, but I've been trying that and it sort of worked quite well. So let me know if you do try that. And, there's plenty more on skincare regimes in last week's podcast. Let's go back to mouth taping then. I'm very excited about mouth taping because I genuinely think that I've been doing it for about a month, as I said earlier, but the real effects probably come when you've been doing it even longer. And one of the things that I forgot to tell you is it's hay fever season here in London at the moment, and my hay fever is nothing like it used to be, and that is partly because I've got on top of the histamine symptoms, and I've been taking quercetin and various vitamin C supplements for it as well. But at night in June, my nose often gets quite stuffed up and blocked. And to be honest, it just gets stuffed up generally. That's histamine intolerance for you. And I think the thing that's excited me most about nose breathing is when you start to use your nose more, literally it opens up. You can take in more oxygen. That is what James Nestor tells me. And when you and as we know from his experiment, when you don't use your nose at all, you just lose the power to breathe oxygen in through your nose. And I think that's been part of the reason in the past that when it comes to seasonal allergies in June, and this is the absolute peak time for it, I get blocked up in the middle of the night. Except at the moment, with now mouth breathing, I'm not doing that. So I wanted to revisit a bit of James Nestor on zestology. He came on my podcast a few months ago. At that point, I'd only read a bit of the book, and now I'm fully into it. Honestly, I mean, it's one of the best books I've read in absolutely ages. I highly recommend it. And this was him on zestology.
You look at any old human skull, an ancient skull from 1,000 years old, 10,000 years old, 100,000 years old, perfectly straight teeth. So why is that? Because our mouths have grown too small. Guess what happens when we have too small of a mouth? We have a smaller airway. And when we have a smaller airway, we are much more apt to have respiratory problems like sleep apnea, snoring, asthma, on and on and on. And this blew my mind because I'd never heard this before. I'd always learned that evolution is this great path forward, survival of the fittest, which is completely wrong. Evolution means change, and animals and different life forms change for better or for worse. And we are, at least in regards to breathing, changing much more for the worst right now.
Okay, so is that because we're not foraging so much, we're not kind of chewing so much, our diets have changed, that our mouths have changed?
Absolutely right, yeah. It almost extends almost entirely to chewing stress. And they've done these studies where they've taken infants and looked at the ones who had been breastfed for 2 years and looked at the ones who had been bottle fed instead. And without that chewing stress of breastfeeding, of pulling the mouth outward, those kids who were bottle fed are much more apt to have sleep apnea, snoring, respiratory problems. Just from that. So it starts at infancy. Wow. And then when you're a kid, if the only thing you're eating is soft stuff, which is the only thing we eat in the modern world. I mean, think about what you ate today. It's all soft. You're not using the muscles in your face. You're not building the bones in your face. And so your face is going to grow flatter and your mouth is going to grow smaller, which is going to make your sinus cavity smaller, all these other problems. So it's a simple matter of physics, and I've looked at dozens and dozens of skulls with the people who study this stuff. And it's amazing to see these skulls 1,000 years old. These people have these huge jaws. They never had their wisdom teeth extracted, right? They never had braces, perfect teeth, and these huge nasal apertures, much larger sinuses. So we're shrinking, and it's causing a massive problems. And this was a story going into this book and this research I had no idea I was going to stumble upon, and it still fascinates me.
Wow. Just interrupting this podcast for one moment to remind you that my podcast partner for June is Magnesium Breakthrough. And I know that over the last couple of months, I've become really, really into it, actually. It's absolutely one of my go-to supplements. I'm going away on holiday soon, and that will be one of the things that is definitely packed. But I thought it might be useful just to read a couple of reviews on Magnesium Breakthrough as well, because if I look at this one from Marie, I'd give this 100 stars if I could. Within 1 month of use, I went from daily struggles with restless legs, constipation and poor sleep to no struggles with any of that. I know it sounds dramatic and far-fetched, but it's true. And have a look at Bill, who's obviously been using an Oura ring. And he says, on the first night of taking Magnesium Breakthrough, my deep sleep jumped up 2 hours, which has been the highest reading so far from my Oura ring. So if you're having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, one of the best things you can possibly do is start getting enough magnesium. And if I ever do struggle with sleep, and sometimes it happens, especially in the middle of the night, you wake up and you can't go back to sleep, I will pop a Magnesium Breakthrough then. There are 7 unique forms of magnesium in Mag Breakthrough, and if you head to magbreakthrough.com/Zestology, use the code Zestology10 during checkout, you can save 10%. And that's magbreakthrough.com/Zestology. Use the code Zestology10. And if you're in the UK, go to bioptimizers.co.uk and use that same discount code. I really think let's just have a look at one more review before we go back to the show. This is from Amanda, who says, I fall asleep much faster and stay asleep now until normal waking hours. You have a customer for life. Wow. It's magbreakthrough.com/Zestology. You get a good chunk off there. Back to the show. What else did you find?
I found... what are you looking for? Do you want breathing methods, or what else has happened to the human skull specifically? Or
I suppose if we aren't breathing correctly, is it simply because of our teeth not fitting into our mouths in the right way? Is it because of evolution? Is there anything else going into why we are not breathing in the right way? And just by the way, James, your microphone a couple of moments ago just cut out a couple of times. I think it might have been... Oh, no,
I'm sorry.
It might have been because of the way that you're breathing, but...
Uh-oh. I will try to... I'm going to step back from it a little bit. Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's fine. It's very brief.
Always something. Okay. So, anxiety and psychological problems play into breathing as well. So anxious people with asthma, other people with respiratory problems are going to be breathing oftentimes too much. We know that because their exhaled carbon dioxide levels are very low. So that is a sign that you're breathing too much. And if you look at any anxious person, that's how they breathe. Also, it has to do with mouth breathing. So many of us, from 25 to 50% of us, breathe through our mouths. And this is really, really bad news. The reason is because the nose humidifies air, it heats air, it conditions air, it gets it right up to the temperature of our bodies before it enters our lungs, which makes this air so much easier for our lungs to process and extract oxygen from. When we breathe through the mouths, we don't get any of those benefits. So I think it's the combination. These are anxious times. We're mouth breathers. We've got evolutionary problems in our face. And all those are this perfect storm that has, I say in the book, we become the worst breathers in the animal kingdom. And I truly believe that. Some bulldogs are pretty close to us. But these are dogs that have been interbred to such a degree that they have completely flat faces, small sinuses, which in many ways is a great analog for our own species. We have flat faces, small sinuses, and we're struggling to breathe right along with them.
So that is it for Zestology. I hope you've enjoyed today. Mouth taping, we've covered elk in London. There might be a bit more on that next week. Babbo botanicals, spermidine, unusual applications for apple cider vinegar, and of course, all things to do with breath as well, which has been absolutely superb. Next week, I'm really excited about the podcast actually, because I've got someone who is a massive expert in a world which I'm a total geek about, and that is tracking. I don't want to tell you too much about Gil Blanda now, but I love tracking and metrics. And indeed, one of the chapters in my new book, which came out a couple of months ago and is available on Amazon in paperback and ebook format, is called Metrics, or rather Metrics, where we look at incredibly advanced ways to track your health and wellness. And I've now tracked down one of the world's top experts in it. And next week, I think you're going to love this. It is possibly going to revolutionize the way that you track your health at a very advanced level, and you can do it all from the comfort of your own home. So that's pretty cool. You get To my mind, you get numbers, not narratives. That's what you want. So next week, we're looking at numbers, not narratives with Gil Blander. And actually, Gil's got an incredibly academic background as well. I felt quite out of my depth interviewing him, but there you go. Just before you go, remember, this podcast is brought to you by Magnesium Breakthrough. Check out the impressive discounts on the page, which is magbreakthrough.com/zestology. I think you can get up to 33% off on magbreakthrough.com/zestology. I use it every single day. Right now, all the windows are open in the house. It's really hot. I'm using up more magnesium in summer. Therefore, you need to take more to keep your levels right and to not cramp and lose all those minerals through your sweat as well. So it's a good time to take Mag Breakthrough, and you can head to magbreakthrough.com/zestology. You get 33% off. And if you're in the UK, then head to the UK Bioptimizer's site, which is bioptimizers.co.uk, and use the code Zestology10. You'll get a chunk of change off there as well. That's it. See you next week for the Tracking Podcast. It's a good one, and thanks for listening.